Hello,
All
Ken.
right.
Welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. Great to have you here today.
Thank you very much. It's a
You're
pleasure to
ready to
be here.
go.
All right. Well, you asked me about what this framework is, the integral framework that I've come up with. And the way I developed it was as I started reading philosophy, psychology, sociology, all these various accounts of reality, I found that none of them were really complete. None of them covered all the bases that should be covered if you're really going to deal with, quote, all of reality.
Hmm.
So I started writing down the areas that I thought should be included.
Well, are they sort of
And
intertwined from theory to theory?
it,
Like, did you
it'd be
find them?
what?
Did you find them they were intertwined? Is that why you?
Um, yes. And I developed a framework that included all of them in a sort of unified whole. And those frameworks were, and I'll explain it in one of two ways. The first way I came up with was just the various aspects of reality that I thought we should include. And I called these quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. And you can get a sense about it. When I said levels, I meant levels of growth or development. Most people don't know that there's a whole school of psychology that's called developmental psychology. And these developmentalists have worked very carefully to track and follow and describe the major stages of development that all human beings go through.
Hmm.
And that struck me as a very important point because these levels of development, I'll use Gene Gebser's terms, he called them archaic, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and systemic or integral. And you can see that each of those levels has a different view of the world. I
Right.
mean, a magic view of the world is something like voodoo, where if you make an image of a doll, if you make that in the image of a person you want to hurt, and then you stab the doll, because the mind can't differentiate the signifier or the thing that's representing the person you don't like and the person itself. So the mind can't differentiate signifier and object being signified. So it confuses them. And it thinks that if you hurt one, you'll hurt the other. So if you stab the doll 10 times with a knife or something, you'll actually hurt the person the doll represents. So that's a magical view of the world. A mythical view of the world is, well, read the Bible, and you'll get a very complex, mythic view of the world. And myths, of course, we trace many of them back to ancient Greece. So we have Aphrodite, Zeus, Apollo, Mars, and so on. And those are all supernatural beings. And we no longer possess magic because magic means if I want to alter the thing, I'll just alter the word representing.
So you're saying at some stage we did possess magic?
That's magic. And when we gave up magic, which happens today at around ages 5 to 6, and
Uh-huh.
happened to us historically around around 50,000 BCE to 10,000 BCE, we gave up magic for myth. And in magic, each individual can perform magic. So if they want to like have the crops grow, they can just think a magical thought, like I want the crops to grow. However we looked at it, that was a magical view of the
Right.
world.
Yep.
And we could change things magically by just altering our thoughts about them or changing the signifier. But
Yep.
with myth, we can no longer perform magic. But our supernatural gods and goddesses and spirits, they can. And if we're going to have, if the gods make our crops grow, then we have to pray to them or petition them. or often do a sacrifice. And at the beginning, frequently around 50,000 BC, it was a human sacrifice.
Right.
The Aztecs are really very well known for building pyramids and then putting a guy on top of the pyramid with a priest, and the priest would stab his chest and pull his heart out and eat his heart. And that was in order to get their gods to do something that they wanted, like make the crops grow or
Yeah.
bring
Yeah.
in whatever they were wanted.
Yeah.
And then rational is emerged historically around the time of the Western Enlightenment, or around 1600 CE. And they were things like, well, according to Alfred North Whitehead, modern science was invented independently and separately by two men, Galileo and Kepler. And in 1605, they both came up with the radical notion that, quote, the laws of nature are to best be understood through measurements. And that meant a logical, rational measuring of the event. So Kepler, for example, measured planetary motions. He actually measured how each planet moved. And prior to Kepler, we thought that when we thought in heliocentric terms, we thought that the planets went around in a perfect circle around the sun. But what Kepler found is they didn't go in a perfect circle, they went in an ellipse, which is a sort of a squished circle, an elongated circle.
Gotcha.
And so he measured planetary motion and came up with the laws of planetary motion, because the laws of nature are to best be understood through measurement. Galileo did the same thing, but he did it from earthly measurement. So he's always pictured as leaning off the Tower of Pisa and dropping a heavy object and a light object, and they both hit the ground at the same time. So he came up with his laws of terrestrial motion. And the super genius Isaac Newton united both Kepler and Galileo in his universal law of gravity.
Yeah.
In other words, the thing that made, and it's often pictured Newton lying under an apple tree and an apple falls on his head and he gets a light bulb goes off. But what he found is that the same force that made the apple fall on his head made the moon circle the earth, namely gravity.
Yeah.
And so that was a very unifying force, but also because of measurement.
Yeah.
So it became important for me to track the development of these different worldviews.
Yeah.
Because very clearly a magic worldview and a mythic worldview and a rational worldview give you very different responses to major life questions.
Yeah. Huh?
So are we going to have a magic view or a mythic view or a rational view or a pluralistic view, which is a multicultural view? Or are we going to have it actually take all those multicultural views and learn how to draw them together into unified pictures of the world, which was what was called systemic or an integral worldview? And I sort of started calling my own approach an integral approach because I was going to use that sort of worldview to come up with my own. And it would integrate all the various worldviews into levels of development, because they all go through a level of development and will actually learn them in the same order. Every human being goes through the same levels of development in the same order. And so that was completely new to me. And most people now, I mean, most college professors now don't have an understanding that there are different worldviews that we all move and grow
So
and develop through.
These different worldviews that you've just described, and we didn't quite finish the pluralistic and the systemic worldviews. I guess there was 5.
Yeah.
Is that right?
It varies. There are 7 to 9.
7 to 9.
Developmentalists.
So there might be a couple more in there. Now you're saying, so
Right.
that's the world history of what we've gone through, evolutionary. Is that also what we go through developmentally as we grow?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Right. That's right.
So
And we go
we'll
through
go
the
through this
same
magical
order.
worldview as a younger person, and then more mythical, and then more
That's right. In
more
today's
cultural.
person, they go through magic in the first 2 or 3 years of life. And then around age 5 or 6, they move into a mythic worldview and go through that till about ages 11 or 12 or beginning adolescence. And then they move into a rational worldview and they go through that for the next 10 or 15 years. And then they develop a pluralistic view. And what a pluralistic view is a rational worldview, which Piaget called thought operating on thought, whereas the previous mythic worldview, which he called concrete operational thinking, was thought operating on the world. So we go from, like if I decide I want to ride my bicycle, that's a concrete operational move. So I'll pull my bike up, get on it, pedal it, which is a concrete operation, and I'll go move myself through space-time in according to concrete operational thinking. Now, when I get to formal operational thinking or rationality, that's what Piaget called thought operating on thought. So it's not so much that I'm like riding a bicycle, which is clearly thought operating on a concrete object, but I'm more thinking about the rules of logic, or I'm thinking about mathematics and arithmetic and addition and subtraction and division and multiplication. Those are all thoughts operating on thoughts.
Right.
And so that's a very different worldview. And the thing about rational worldviews is they're always unified. So in other words, we don't have Protestant chemistry versus Hindu chemistry. We just have chemistry. And it's the same for Protestants, Hindus, Jews, and so on. So we just have one unified worldview. And that's what we get with rationality.
Yeah.
But when we develop pluralistic, we sort of start looking around the world and we go, well, wait a minute. We have, the United States has this way of thinking, but Lithuania has a completely different worldview. It thinks differently. And there's some truth to the way Lithuanians think about the world. So this is the development of what's called pluralistic or multicultural thinking. And the only problem with that is it tends towards fragmentation.
Yeah.
And
is that what we're experiencing now?
That's right. And so, and the cognitive structure of pluralistic thinking is not capable of integrating or pulling together their different worldviews. But when we develop to the next and essentially highest stage that we've developed so far, the integral or systematic stage, that's what happens. A form of thinking called integral or systemic or unifying, it emerges and it looks at all the different worldviews that what we call the green pluralistic stage has introduced, and it starts to pull them all together. It sees how you can unite the worldview of Lithuanians, South Africans, Americans, British, and so on. And so we start to get these large, integral, systemic worldviews, and they're very profound, they're very powerful, and they show us ways that we can indeed develop a unified or holistic worldview. And this, of course, is important if we want to actually get along. If we can see the world in a similar unified way, then we're much more open to ourselves becoming similar and unified. And so obviously the development of higher and higher worldviews is a very important part of our everyday life if we want to have peace and harmony and unity and holistic interactions.
So
So
this is the integral theory that you've developed you've written a lot of books in your time.
yes, yes, quite a few.
And do they all revolve around this idea of this integral theory?
Yes. And the way I said I would explain the integral framework in two slightly different ways.
Yeah.
And the first way was quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. And levels were the levels of development that all human beings go through. Well, another way I describe this integral framework, and it means I'm going to give a list of various topics, and it means that the integral framework includes approaches that cover all of those topics. And those topics are waking up, growing up, opening up, cleaning up, and showing up. Now, what each of those means:
waking up, growing up,
growing up, opening up,
cleaning up,
and showing up. And each of those are different ways that we will respond to the world. And each of them gives a different answer to our fundamental questions. So waking up, for example, is what you find in all of the world's mystical traditions. And basically all the world's great religions, there are maybe 7 or 8 of them, but they all have a small but purely mystical core. And this is in Christian mysticism, all of Buddhism, which seeks to gain enlightenment, which is a waking up experience where you feel that you're no longer the separate self, you're one with the entire universe. And that's a process of waking up. And so it's called enlightenment or awakening or waking up or whatever. I generally call it waking up. And that's a very important aspect to have in one's life, because when you have an experience of waking up, you literally do feel that you're not the separate, isolated, alone self. You really feel that you're one with the entire world. You're one with the entire universe. So you no longer see the mountain, you are the mountain. You no longer walk to the woods, you are the woods. You no longer stand on the earth, you are the earth. And that's how you feel. And this is what Buddhism calls an enlightenment. Zen Buddhism calls it a satori. And it's a profound, it's called waking up because it's just like when you're asleep and then you wake up in the morning and you might be having a bad dream. And you wake up and you go, oh, thank God, that was just a nightmare. It's not real. And because you're awakened to a realer reality. And so that's why enlightenment or waking up or awakening is called a waking up, because right now all of this is felt to be a world of separate things and events that are all split off from each other and not connected in any way. But when you have an awakening experience, you realize that you are one with all of them. And you feel that direct oneness. I can give a quick example of what a waking up experience is like. And you can see what it entails. But this was introduced by a gentleman called Douglas Harding, who's a member of the London Buddhist Society. And so he is a Buddhist, and he's working with enlightenment. And he calls it, in a book he wrote, On Having No Head. Now, what he means by having no head, and what he means by that, he says, you can see every part of your body. You can see all of your feet, your ankles, your legs, your thighs, your torso, your chest, your arms, your hands, your fingers. But notice you can't really see your head. You don't have a head, because all you can see are sort of 2 little fleshy blobs on either side. But other than that, you don't have a head. What is located behind your face, or where you think your head is actually what you're looking at right now. So you're probably looking at a computer screen. But if you notice that you don't have a head, You just have an empty space sort of arising there, but in that empty space, there's a computer screen, and it's sitting right where you thought your head was. And so you're not looking at the computer screen. You literally are one with your computer screen, and it's arising right where you thought your head was. And so that's I'm having no head.
It's a bit trippy.
And when you start to sort of get the sense of that, and about 50% of the people that hear this get it. So whether you get it or not, it's not that important.
Well, it's
But
something you need to think a bit more about.
Yeah, but you can see what it means. I mean, when you're just actually, you're not looking at the wall is sitting right where you thought your head was. And you're not looking at the floor is sitting right where you thought your head was. And that state is called non-dual awareness or not to awareness. And the aim of an enlightenment or a satori or a waking up experience is to replace our dualistic separate viewpoints where we're in here behind our face and the rest of the world is out there at a distance, separated far away, and to realize that no, actually the entire world out there is actually sitting right where we thought our head was, and we're one with everything that's arising moment to moment. And when you have that as a permanent realization, you have what's called an enlightenment or a satori experience.
Is it possible to get that?
That's what?
Is it possible to get that?
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's very possible. And you can just, if you meditate, if you do like Zen meditation, that's the actual end. You want to realize that the wall you're sitting in front of and meditating isn't out there. It's sitting right here, right where you thought your head was. And you are one with that. There's no separation between you and everything you're aware of right now. And that is an exhilarating experience. To all of a sudden be one with everything. It's like a massive degree of love, because love is this intimate connection between you and another person. Well, when you love the entire world, you are connected with the entire world. And the entire world is sitting right where you thought your head was. So that's Douglas Harding's on having no head. And it's just a general introduction to what waking up is like. But notice in that waking up experience, you can be one with the entire world, but those different levels of development that we talked about, archaic, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and integral, you can be at any one of those stages of development and have a waking up experience.
Right.
So we have to separate waking up from growing up because they're very different developmental experiences. Opening up applies to the same sort of unification of things that we thought were separate. And developmental psychologists often call these separate things our multiple intelligences. And what that means is that we all have, psychologists disagree on how many multiple intelligences we have, but it's somewhere between 8 and 12. But we don't just have cognitive intelligence, which is our normal thinking process. We have emotional intelligence, moral intelligence, spiritual intelligence, aesthetic intelligence, spatial intelligence, and so on. So as I say, about 8 or 12. And when we realize we have all these multiple intelligences and we have access to each one of them, we can actually, well, I'll tell you what I did when I found out about that. I took a different multiple intelligence, and each day of the week, I identified with just that one intelligence. So first I happened to do aesthetic intelligence, which is the perception of beauty. And I just started looking at everything as if I was looking at it through the eyes of beauty. And at first I didn't get very far. I mean, there was just still all sort of ugly objects out there. But the more I did it, the more I realized that I really did have an aesthetic viewpoint. a viewpoint that represented beauty or what was beautiful in the world.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, all sorts of things started looking beautiful to me. And that was really fascinating. Then I did moral intelligence. And I started thinking, okay, what's the right thing to do in this circumstance? And that's the moral thing. And so I had beauty and morality. I already knew what cognitive thinking was because I was thinking all the time. So that was cognitive thinking. And then spatial intelligence, spiritual intelligence. Spiritual intelligence, the way I use the term, is different from a waking up intelligence. Waking up intelligence is a genuine, real spiritual experience. You're literally one with everything. And that oneness is often called God or the Tao or Brahman. Or
So waking up
however-
intelligence is another form of intelligence,
Yes. Waking
as well
up
as spiritual
uses
intelligence. So they're separate.
yes. And spiritual intelligence is the intelligence that we develop when we think about infinite or ultimate realities at whatever stage of development we're actually at. So most of voodoo and really primitive religions are the religious view of magic. And when you're thinking in those voodoo terms of magical, hurting somebody by stabbing the doll, or if you're just thinking in magical terms, like if I change the way I think about that thing, it'll actually change that thing itself. Then when I switch to mythic and I start thinking about all the gods and goddesses, or maybe just one god. I mean, if you read the Old Testament, you get magic or mythic appearing everywhere. And there are all sorts of supernatural gods, or at least a supernatural god. And he has a son and also a Holy Spirit. So those are three examples of a spiritual intelligence that produces a multiple intelligence of spiritual mythic understanding. And that's why many developmental psychologists actually call the mythic stage of development the mythic literal stage, because the people that believe in Zeus or believe in Apollo or believe in Aphrodite, they believe they're real entities and they really exist. And they all live on Mount Olympus, another mythic entity. That's when we realize we have all these different multiple intelligences and we actually try to integrate them or use all of them, or at least get in touch with all of them, so we know we actually have all of these multiple intelligences.
Yeah.
That's another form of opening up to all of our intelligences. And it's a very important aspect of reality that we need to know about if we're going to really include all of reality. How can you include all of reality if you're not including all of your multiple intelligences? You're not even aware of all of reality.
Well, most people wouldn't be aware. I wasn't aware of all these different intelligences.
Right. Exactly.
In your book, Finding Radical Wholeness, you talk about waking up, growing up,
Right.
cleaning up, and you talk about these multiple intelligences, right?
Right.
So do you go deep into these intelligences to help us better understand them, so then we can personally integrate them?
Yes, enough to let each reader know what the intelligence is and how they have it, so they can be aware of it and include it. And that covers our opening up part of wholeness. And each of these factors, waking up, growing up, opening up, cleaning up, and showing up, produces a new wholeness, a new type of wholeness. So waking up is a wholeness with the entire universe. Growing up is a wholeness with the higher worldviews. So we want to get to at least the systematic or integral stage of growing up and the wholeness that it offers, which is a very real wholeness. And then opening up is opening up to the wholeness of all of our multiple intelligences. And then we have cleaning up, and cleaning up is generally ascribed to Sigmund Freud and his inner circle. And his inner circle were all bona fide geniuses. Freud himself was so bright, he just attracted literal geniuses to work with him. So you've heard the names of a lot of his inner circle: Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, Otto Rank, Salvatore Ferenczi. And these were all geniuses that worked with Freud in the first elaboration of our unconscious mind. And what Freud found was that we can take various aspects, thoughts, ideas, feelings, emotions, and we can dislike some of them. And when we do that, we seal them out of our awareness and push them into the unconscious. And when we do that, we almost always refer to them as an it. And the reason is that an it is what's called the third person pronoun. And this, look, to review the grammar of our pronouns, we have first person is the perspective of the person speaking. So that's an I, a me, a mine. So I'm first person right now, I'm speaking. And second person is the person being spoken to. So that's a you or a thou or thine. So right now you're second person. Then when you talk, you're first person and I'm second person. And so those pronouns again are you, thy, thou, thine, and so on. And then third person is the perspective of the person or thing being spoken about. So that's he, she, they, them, it, or its. And when people start to split off and create things like obsession, compulsion, anxiety, and so on, they refer to them generally as an it. So they'll say the anxiety, it overcomes me. I can't do anything about it. Or the obsession, it controls me. I can't do anything about it. And so, right. So when Freud was asked, what does this new psychoanalysis of yours do? He is said to have replied, where it was, their ego shall be. And most people have heard of the word id, and they know that from Freud. The id is all of your hidden unconscious instinctual processes. But what people don't know is that Freud never once used the term id or ego. He used the actual German pronouns, the I, which is his translator, James Strachey, translated these terms into Latin because he thought Latin made Freud sound more scientific. So where Freud would write the I, James Strachey translated it as the ego. And Freud never said the ego. Freud always said the I. And then as for the id, Freud never used the term id. He used the term the it. And so what Freud really said was, where it was, there I shall become. And that's actually a brilliant summary of what psychoanalysis does. And you can see this in the work of, let's say, somebody like Fritz Perls. Fritz Perls is a very famous star at Esalen Institute. Esalen Institute was the first growth center in the United States. And within 1 year after Esalen's founding, there were 300 other growth centers in this country, all modeled on Esalen Institute, which is just astonishing. So Fritz Perls worked at Esalen, and what he would do is usually hundreds of people would show up for his workshops, and he would set a chair in front of him and then an empty chair across from the chair in front of him. And then he'd say, okay, who wants to work today? Come on up, sit down in the chair. They'd sit down in the chair. And Freud would say, okay, what's your problem? And they might say, I've got this horrible anxiety. I can't control it. So that's the it.
Yeah.
So Perls would say, okay, put that it anxiety in the empty chair and talk to it. And the person on us goes, what do you mean talk to it? And Perls would say, well, ask it, why are you doing this to me? Why do I get you? What do I have to do to get rid of you? And just anything you think of, just talk to it. And so the person would stumble and sort of try to talk to their anxiety, and they're still addressing it as an it. And then Rose would say, okay, now sit in the chair and you be the it, you be the anxiety, and answer yourself. So maybe you ask your anxiety, why are you doing this to me? So what would you answer them? And the person would say, well, because you're an idiot, you're stupid, you don't know what you're doing, you're a train wreck. And Rose said, can I answer that? And he'd have them go back and forth in a real conversation. And the point about a real conversation is it always involves a real first person and a real second person. So as they would talk back and forth, they would begin to re-identify with the anxiety that they were pushing out of their mind.
Yeah.
And so where it was, their I shall become. So as they talked to this it and started identifying with it, within 10 to 15 minutes, everybody in the audience could literally see this person's anxiety decrease because they had re-identified with the split off it that was appearing as this anxiety.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that.
So is that the case of the ego making that separation for us? Is that why the ego is there, to help us protect what we believe about the I instead of integrating it?
That's right. And the split is the split between your conscious I, the ego, and the split off facet, the it. If the split's serious, it's called a psychosis, which means a split mind. And a psychosis is a very, very serious mental illness. People often push stuff out of their mind so much that they hallucinate it. And so they'll hear voices. They're schizophrenic, in other words, which is another term that means split mind.
Yeah.
But the less intense form is called a neurosis. And that's just where you get depressed, or you get anxiety, or you get obsessions or compulsions. And those are cured by reuniting the I and the it, where it was their I shall become. And Freud is credited with making that discovery, although each of his inner group, Carl Jung, Alfred Otto Rank, they each developed their own version of what it was that was repressed and split off from the psyche. Freud notoriously emphasized sexual impulses, sexual aggression, were the impulses that he felt most often became pushed out of the mind as its. And most of his inner circle didn't think sex was that big a deal. And so Freud had already designated Carl Jung his, quote, my crown prince and successor. So Freud had already decided that he was going to have Carl Jung be his main disciple.
Yeah.
And the last time they spoke to each other, Freud looked at Jung and said, promise me you won't give up the libido theory. Because if you do that, all we have left is the black mud of the black tide of occultism. And in his autobiography, Jung wrote, what Freud didn't know is that what he called occultism was the only thing I was interested in for my entire life, because Jung really had a deep interest in mystical and occult and paranormal experiences. So they literally, that was the last conversation they ever had. They never spoke to each other, not once, for the rest of their lives. Wow. And Jung went his way and created his own following. And so most people are aware of Jung and the fact that he has some sort of system that they don't know about, but they've heard the name Carl Jung because he was a real genius, as were his other inner circle. So I call that process of uniting the I and the it, the cleaning up process, because that's often what people refer to it as.
Okay, and this just talk us through showing up. It sounds like a lot of depth in your work, and obviously in this book as well. But I do want to wrap it up. So the final part that you talk about there is showing up after cleanup.
Right. Showing up, we've already talked about first person, second person, and third person pronouns.
Yeah.
First person is the perspective of the person speaking, I, me, mine. Second person is the person being spoken to, you, thou, thine. And third person is the person or thing being spoken about. And notice it's person or thing being spoken about. So it includes personal pronouns, he, she, they, them, and objects, just a plain old neutral, not a boy or a girl, but an it. And so it and its are third person pronouns as well.
Uh-huh.
And what I noticed was that these different pronouns, and by the way, some developmental psychologists think that these pronouns are so important, they'll actually define a stage of development as the addition of another pronoun with its own perspective. So Jane Lovinger, for example, has 7 or 8 major levels of development, and each one of those is an addition of a new perspective from a new pronoun. And pronouns can go all the way up to 7th person pronoun, 8th person. And so her first stage is marked by a first person pronoun. The young infant can only identify with an I space. It doesn't even understand you or thou or he or she or anything like
Uh-huh.
that.
Yeah.
But by the second or third year, as her second stage emerges, a second person pronoun, a you or a thou, the child will start understanding that perspective and start talking into a you, or even as a you, if they take a second person perspective.
Yeah.
And then her third stage is marked by the emergence of a third person pronoun. And that takes an extra strong capacity to take perspective, because I'm not identifying with the person that's talking, that's first person, and I'm not identifying with you, who's the person I'm talking to, that's the second person. I'm identifying with somebody I don't even see, or maybe don't even know. It's a he, or a she, or a they, or a them. And so that doesn't tend to emerge in a clear way until formal operational thinking or rational thought emerges, because rational thought can take a third person perspective. And so her third stage, which is formal operational thinking or rational thought, emerges with a third person perspective. And then her pluralistic stage is a fourth person perspective, and her integral stage is a fifth person perspective. And then she has 2 more stages.
Yeah. Mm.
So all of those are, and the point about calling it showing up is we want to show up for each of our real perspectives, because
Yeah.
this is clearly an important part of how we see the world. So that's what showing up is. Are we going to show up for all of our perspectives, or are we not? And if we're not, we're really cutting ourselves off from an enormous amount of reality, particularly third person, he, she, they, them, it, and its. And it and its covers all of the material universe. I mean, the moon isn't it, the sun isn't it, the earth isn't it, a tree is it. And so so I basically put all 5 of these different approaches to reality together.
Yeah.
So waking up, growing up, opening up, cleaning up, and showing up. And as you can see, as we've gone through them, each of those gives us a different type of wholeness. Is that clear enough?
Yep.
And so I have a framework where I write this down on a sheet of paper, and I call it all quadrant, all level, or the AQUA framework. And that's because I write first, second, third, and fourth person pronouns as 4 boxes in a cross.
Yeah.
So when we draw the 4, we call it a 4 quadrant diagram. It's just a cross, and in the upper left
Yeah.
is all of the stages of growing up and waking up and opening up and cleaning up.
Mm-hmm.
And when we use all four quadrants, that's called showing up, using our first person, second person, third person, and fourth person realities. And of course, you can keep adding fifth,
Right.
sixth, seventh person.
Yeah.
And the one that I haven't mentioned, although I have in terms of tangentially in terms of waking up, is, remember, I called quadrants. Well, the quadrants, the four quadrants, are the four boxes in the diagram. Quadrants, levels. The levels are archaic, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and integral. Those are the main levels of growth that we all go through.
Yeah.
Lines are lines of development, and those are our multiple intelligences. And they're called lines because they all grow through the archaic, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and integral levels of development, but they're different lines. And these lines,
But they're there all the way through.
Right. And
Right.
they can grow at slightly different rates. So
Mm-hmm.
generally cognitive development or sheer thinking proceeds about one or two levels ahead of most other lines, because it's just the thought process.
How we develop, yeah.
One we develop the most and the earliest. So you have states of consciousness, which are the quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. And states are just a first person experience. A first person, remember, is the experience of the person's talking. So it's an I, it's a me.
Mm-hmm.
And we can have different states, and particularly with the psychedelic revolution, everybody learned about altered states of consciousness, which is when you take an LSD trip and your mind just gets really blown apart. That's an altered state of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And meditation introduces you to several different altered states of consciousness. One of the most common one they introduce you to is the one of having no head, where you're staring at the wall as you're meditating, and all of a sudden the wall and you become one, non-separate, non-dual entity.
I'm curious to know. I mean, I'm going to share the book with the audience. There's a lot to you, and there's a lot to what you're saying here, and obviously a lot to your work and this book, with all these different quadrants and levels and lines that you talked about throughout this interview. Right. How do you go about putting that into a book? Was that challenging for you?
Well, it was in a certain way, in that whenever I begin to write, it's a challenge, because no matter how much I've written about it before, I'm writing about it fresh. So I'm going to say, how can I take a new approach to this? And I have written about all of this many times, because I have written, as I mentioned, 35 books, and almost all of them are talking about some aspect of this quadrant level line states type model. And so I've written about most of those topics before. In some cases, I've written about it many times before. But this was an entirely new approach. And so I just threw everything out that I had written, and I started fresh.
And you had a look at it.
And and I think I did, as I said, if I'm allowed to say this, I think I did a pretty good job, because it doesn't strike me as my best book. So if people are going to start with something, they should start with Finding Radical Wholeness.
It's available on, I mean, that sounds like it wraps up all your work almost. It's available on Amazon, Finding Radical Wholeness. Do you have a website or something people can reach out to you on, Ken?
Ken Wilber.
I might have that here. Yeah.
Or Integral Life.
Okay, I'll put both web links in the show notes for Ken. So guys listening out there, if you're interested in this deep conversation, you wouldn't be here to the end if you weren't, I don't believe. So if you like this kind of thought, then you're going to love Ken's work as well. So check him out online. I'll stick the links
Right.
in the show notes for this episode. Ken, it's
Great.
been a pleasure. Thank you.
That's great.
Guys out there, keep on living fully, having more meaning and finding more joy. Talk to you soon.
Bye.